So today we are going to turn water into this. And we're going to do it only using stock Ableton plugins. I'm going to walk you through the entire process as well as what I'm thinking as I'm going through it. For those of you who might be more advanced or are looking to get something specific out of this video, I have timestamps below. Feel free to jump around as needed. I'll see you on the other side. So what I love about this is the texture, and that's what I want to preserve. So we are going to create a kind of synthy keyboard-like instrument, right? And so what I want to really primarily do is preserve the texture. I'm going to do that while also drawing out a resonance. And we can actually achieve this quite effectively with Ableton stock EQ, right? So as we listen to this recording, the first thing that I notice is some extraneous low end that I don't want. I really just want the sound of the water pouring out, right? So first thing I'm going to do is just create a low pass and bring it up just over 100. I could go higher if I wanted to, and I may. We're not going to use that bit. We'll cut it off before that, in fact, so we can get rid of it. But I think I'm going to settle it right here. And I'm going to settle it at around 235 because I want to draw out C3 as my resonance. And C3 is 261 Hertz than Ableton here. So we are going to go ahead and set a band to that, and then crank up the gain while tightening up the Q. So let's listen. So it's really, really faint, but we are getting, we're getting a resonance ever so slightly. So what we need to do then is we need to add more gain to that resonance. And so what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the EQ, but let's lower the output gain of this EQ. So that way we're not just stacking a 15 decibel boost on 15 decibel boost. We're going to go ahead and we're going to turn it down by 6 decibels here. Okay, we're going to repeat the process, and then we're going to turn this one down by 6 as well. And I'm going to do it one more time to really make sure that that C3 is out. I'm not going to add the reduction. And then I'm going to actually add a shelf here. Okay, that feels nice to me. We've got our note coming out clearly, but then we also still have the sound of the water running across the pavement, right? So now I'm just going to go ahead and resample this. I'm a huge fan of resampling as opposed to freeze and flattening. So that way I can always go back and make any edits that are needed. So let's go through and then record this really quickly. Perfect. So then now we have the EQ baked into this recording here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and just rename this clip. I should have named the audio track itself, but I'm going to name this clip Tiny Pavement Waterfall. Pavement Waterfall. And I'm actually going to go back to the front of it here and put C3, and then I will do Command J to consolidate and permanently put that name on that clip. So now let's actually build an instrument out of it, right? So I'm gonna use Ableton sampler device for this. Sampler is slept on, it is amazing. So we're gonna go ahead and drop it in here. And then since we drew out a resonance at C3, we don't actually have to do anything to tune this up, right? So let's even just hear what it's like off the bat. How fun. I love that. So what I want to do is set up a loop point so that I can hold notes down for a nice long time. And so we're going to use the loop sustain mode, and let's just kind of set it for, let's say, here and here, and add a bit of crossfade. We're going to hold down a note and see how that goes. Great. And if I hold down a chord, I could probably hold it forever and we won't really hear the loop points too much. Already it sounds really wonderful. I am already hearing that I may want to go back and actually lower how much I'm boosting up this this water amount. And so I'm actually going to do that really quick. And if anything, I can have different versions of it. We can use a layer control in the final instrument. So now we can actually start to process it in interesting ways, right? I'm immediately going to group this device on itself and have macros here, because I'm sure there are things that I'm going to want to assign to macros for the eventual instrument overall, right? And already I'm just going to set up a volume macro as my final macro. Right? If you're unfamiliar with macros, they're used for audio effect racks and instrument racks, and they're amazing. And so whenever you have something grouped together into a rack, whether that's just a single device or multiple devices, you can, below the device activator, there's the show hide macros toggle. And now we have it set up. You can have up to 16 macros and as few as 1 macros if we're living that big knob life. I usually like to go with the standard 8. And usually have my last one be volume, right? So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. What I want to do is go over and open up the release here. I'm actually just going to map the release to macro 7. I usually have my my release down towards the volume control too, and just have a higher release here, because now this is going to feel key-like. And similarly, I'm going to open up the release on this. And yeah, play with the volume on this, drop it down. So it's sounding pretty solid so far, but we can play around a bit more with it. Of course, we've got our filter here, and usually I leave it on low pass, and I'm going to just map the filter frequency to my first macro. Just call that filter. So we can always darken up the sound that way. So we have a couple of more macros to play with to decide what is happening. We'll also then set up the attack here to be macro 6. Beautiful, lovely, great. We're making some cool sounds here. I'm also a huge fan of the FM oscillator, which I feel like is like the most maligned part of sampler. And I understand, because it gets crazy really, really quickly. But if you use it in moderate doses, you can create some really amazing sounds with it, right? And one of my favorite things to do is to use it to create attack on an instrument. So right now we have a 30-second delay, right? So if I kind of bring up this volume, it just hangs out the whole time, right? Same with this release, right? But if we tighten up both of these, so let's go to just like 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. Right? It creates just kind of like a note, a pitch, right? And we can play around with the waveform and the coarse value. To a ton of different variations. That's really quite nice. I like that. I'm going to leave that as such for now. So when I go through this process, a lot of what I'm doing is just playing around to dial sounds in. It is just a massive part of this whole thing, right? So I like this. I think let's keep the settings as is. And we're going to just go ahead and set up a macro to control oscillator volume. And so I'm going to map this to macro 5 and just call this FM amount. And we'll just call it FM. It's self-explanatory. And we're going to go ahead and let's see where I want to cap this off at. Actually, I mean, I don't mind it going all the way up if somebody wants to have it that bright. I think that's great. Now, one thing we could do is actually set it up to be with multisampling, right? So we could set it up and have this one, which we can, this is the first one we took, which we can label this C3 pavement waterfall water louder. Great, beautiful, simple, gets the job done. Consolidate that so we've got that layered in there, right? So we could throw this in here and set it up to either be, we could set up with velocity. Actually, that's a really nice thing that we could play with. Or we could set it up as a layer that we could select between. And so, for example, if we did a layer, let's say we have it set up, actually that's the opposite way than what I want to have it set up. So let's set it up to where the heavier water is the higher values and the less water is the lower value, right? So if I kind of just play a chord, so by time we get up there, we get full water, right? So that can be set up as like a layer control. And what's really cool is we could always call that like water amount. We could also set it up as velocity too. So let me go ahead and try that out. And let's move that back so that everything's kind of stacked on top of each other here. It's going to make this whole thing rather splashy, which I think is fun. So let's just, set up a simple crossfade where higher velocity gives us more water. Perfect. Beautiful. I really like using LFOs to do some cool stereo stuff, especially if we kind of start to widen this image a bit and then start to map that to something like, we could play around honestly with filter frequency, and it would just only really affect the filter when it closes. Maybe phase at 180. We could also play around with spin here. Go random. Oh, well, you can really only play with like width and random. Almost starts to dance around everything, right? Which I think is really cool. Super fun, right? I think what we'll do is we'll set that up to control macro. Let's set up, so we're going to control it via the rate here, sorry, the frequency. And we're going to go ahead and map that to macro 2. And then we're also going to map the on-off to macro 2 as well. So let's go into the mapping menu so we can play with what's going on here. And by default, the on-off for the LFO is set to 1 to 127. We actually need to set that from 1 to 0. So now when I turn the mapping off here, if the LFO hertz value for the frequency is at 0.01, its slowest, the LFO will just turn off entirely. But then if I raise it up just a little bit, it'll turn on and engage. So this is a really great thing if you want to use LFOs, but you want to also turn them off when you aren't using them. What I want to do is just set up one other parameter, and let's use an audio effect, one of my favorite, which is grain delay. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to find a nice setting for grain delay, and we're going to set up a macro for grain pitch, and then probably grain amount. So that way we can control whether we're using the effect or not at all, right? Super cool. Honestly, frankly, I like that setting as is, right? So let's actually go ahead then and map the, let's go and map the wet dry to macro 3. And then let's go ahead and map the pitch here to macro 4. So then we're going to call this grain amount, and we're going to call this one grain pitch. Beautiful. Okay, cool. So then we have made essentially a beautiful little instrument here with a bunch of playable parameters. And then we're going to just set up one other nice little detail. So we're going to grab a MIDI effect called expression control, place this in the rack, and then we're going to map the feedback control of the grain delay to the mod wheel, which I think will be a ton of fun. And there you have it. We've got a super cool water instrument that started life, as we can remember. If we take off all these EQs, as this. Not bad. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in having this instrument for yourself, you can pick it up over on my Gumroad page. The link is in the description. Or if you're a paid newsletter subscriber, you can get it for free. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.